Getting your panels into place with the help of a laser is the best way to ensure that everything will line up like it did at the factory. Today, I continue working on this 2021 Mazda CX-5 that was totaled due to being blasted in the front end. In the last video, with the help of a laser, I was able to determine that indeed both of the frame rails as well as a passenger side strut tower ended up moving over toward the driver's side of the vehicle as a result of the accident. So I got my homemade frame rack into position and clamped the vehicle down to it. Then I used factory chassis dimensions to make sure that both of the frame rails would get pulled right back into spec.
Right on the money.
With frame rails finalized, next I jumped onto the strut tower, and after slightly over-pulling it with the release of a frame rack, the strut tower sprung right back into its original location. Then I double-checked all of my work just to make sure that all of the dimensions are true and that I did not miss anything. Also, in the last video, I started cutting out some of this metal that was getting in the way, and this is where I'm going to pick up today. I'm gonna go ahead and extract the rest of this distressed metal, and I will show you my process of how I'm gonna replace all of the new parts, and I will do it with a laser-like precision. Oh, and I'm also going to address this damaged door. I will get the leading edge of it pulled out, metal worked, bondoed up, and in primer ready for paint.
Guys, I just realized something. I misled you. I'm sorry, it was not intentional. This body dimension diagram is a lie. Well, not really. I just realized that I made a mistake, and when I found these body dimensions, they actually pertained to the previous model of a CX-5. Not the 17 and up, but 2016 and older. That's kind of bad, right? Not really. Let me explain why. So far, the only measurement that I used from that diagram was for the distance between the bolt holes on the frame rails. And the saving grace here is the fact that the older and the newer model of CX-5 actually sit on the same chassis. That means that a lot of the actual unibody dimensions are still going to be the same. These vehicles share the same motor, transmission. I think some of the suspension components are the same, but I know that the frame is going to be the same. That means that when I use the measurement to make my frame pool, I actually still had it done the right way. So there's no issues there. So once I got to the point where I was trying to figure out if this area had moved at all, I started looking at the measurements, but the things were not lining up because the front part, basically this area right here, is going to be different on 2017 and up and the 2016 and down models. And maybe even some of this outer metal is going to be also different. So before I go any further, I got to make sure that all of my measurements are looking good on this end. Luckily, I have a solution to this. It's not as detailed as what I was working with earlier, but at least I know that my new measurements are going to be correct ones.
So here's my solution. I will be using Mitchell estimating software. I have access to it at the place where I work. Here I'm just using a random Mazda CX-5 VIN code. On the next page, I scroll down and click on an Underhood Dimensions tab. And that is exactly what I get, a bird's eye view of the entire engine bay from up above.
This is pretty detailed, and it's given me all of the dimensions that I'll need under the hood. The only dimension that I'm not getting with this schematic is my front frame rail placement. But since I already have that squared away, this will take care of the rest of my needs.
So let's go ahead and take a look at our schematic. And more specifically, let's take a look at this area. We got two black dots up there and one white dot directly below them.
These two black holes correspond with our hood hinge holes, and then we got this next body hole next to it. And this is what the schematic refers to as our measurement point. Core support bolt on this side corresponds with a core support bolt on this end. And if you follow this horizontal line, basically from here to there,
our reading should be 797 millimeters. I drop one end of the measuring tape into that core support bolt hole and I pin it down with a magnet. Now let's see what kind of measurement we're gonna get.
And the center of that hole falls right on 797 millimeters. This measurement checked out 100%, but I'm not really surprised because we did not have any front end damage in this area where this metal would have gotten crunched up and the measurement would have gotten shorter. This side was mainly unaffected, so the lengths checked out just fine. But since the vehicle got hit this way, all of that force might have transferred through the radiator support and might have affected that area by pushing it over.
Let me just pause really quickly and say that the whole reason I'm putting so much emphasis on the positioning of upper driver structure is because I'm going to mirror the structural part of the passenger side to the driver side. So now let's go ahead and quickly check where this bolt hole sits in relation to the center of the car.
Let's look at the measurement here. So once again, we're looking at that core support bolt, which is in the front, and the measurement between those two bolts should be at 1172. But we cannot measure out the 1172 because we are missing this whole side here. Therefore, we're going to measure out to this center line. And the center line is being provided by the laser.
And for those of you who are new to the channel, or maybe you are just new to this build and you have no idea how I got this laser positioned where it's splitting this car exactly down the middle, I actually went over all of that in the first video on this build. So if you want to see how I did that, I will leave a link to that video at the very end of this video.
So for that, we're going to have to split that 1172 down the middle.
And 1172 divided by 2 gets us 586. I put one end of the measuring tape down into the core support bolt hole with a magnet holding it down in place and then run the tape out to the center of a car. Our target number is 586 millimeters. It's a little hard to see, but the laser is falling onto 587 millimeter mark.
And being off by just 1 millimeter is basically being in spec. So all that it really means is that this panel is sitting 1 millimeter further out this way. So now we got the X and the Y axis covered. What about the Z axis? Well, based on the fact that there was no direct hit to this area, and I'm not really seeing any visual kinks anywhere within this panel right here, it is safe to say the height of this panel is right where it's supposed to be and it's not affected. So at this point, I'm ready to drill out all of this damaged metal and basically get our new metal put in place to mirror the other undamaged side.
In a comment section to my previous video, I've had few people ask me what sort of a spot weld drill am I using, and to answer that question, I'm using a Spottle 2 spot weld cutter. This tool may not be for everyone, since it is pretty spendy. There are cheaper alternatives to one of those, and I will leave a link to one of them in the video description down below. There are going to be other areas where you simply cannot use that same tool, so you have to use a drill just like what I'm doing right now. I'm not using just any drill bit, but a special spot weld cutting drill bit, same one as I'm using in the Spottle. It has this sharp raised point in the center that really helps the drill to stay in a spot that you're drilling instead of walking all over the place. Few more spot welds on the bottom of the panel, and with all of the spot welds out of the way, now I'm ready to get this panel extracted. And yes, the screwdriver isn't exactly a correct tool for this job, but in a pinch it works out just fine. With the outer panel out of the way, the next and the last piece to be extracted was this upper panel that was directly tied into the strut tower. I trimmed it back a bit with some tin snips just so I could get my spot weld cutter into position. Throughout this whole drilling process, I've only been drilling through the side of the damaged panels, meaning only the panels that are being removed are the ones that will be drilled through. And all of the panels that will remain on the vehicle will not have a hole. The reason for this will become apparent in the next video, so make sure to tune in for that. And now I'm going to ensure that all of the areas that I drilled out are cleaned up and are nice and flat to become a new mating surfaces between our old and new panels. And this tool works great for this task, especially if I gotta get into some tight areas. I'll leave a link to it in the video description down below.
So after quite a bit of drilling, I got all of the damaged metal extracted, and here are our 3 replacement parts. So these 2 elements are by themselves. However, this element right here is part of this whole strut tower assembly. So now I'm gonna go ahead and drill this piece out.
I did not want to bore you with any more drilling, so I went ahead and got that done off camera.
At this point, I'm just about ready to start fitting these panels in. And one more thing I want to note is, if you look, there's a line right here, and there's also a line right there. And those are scribe lines. I went ahead and scribed the outline of the original panel that was in here before I got it removed. So this way, once the new panel goes in, I can just line it up with a scribe line. This way it takes me less time to figure out where this panel should be because I'm placing it in the same exact spot where our original panel used to be.
So once I snake the panel in and get it lined up with a scribe line, I'll go ahead and firmly secure it into place with some vice grips.
And now with the panel nicely secured in place, I can go ahead and take some measurements just to make sure that it is actually right where it's supposed to be. I want to make sure that it's sitting in the right place in relation to the other side. And also I want to double check the height of the panel. I got the magnet holding the end of the measuring tape to the panel, and our measurement falls right on 651 millimeters. Now with the tape reversed, I got the edge of it clamped down to the very edge of the panel on our other side. And the measurement that we're getting is 651.5 millimeters. And by being off by just a half a millimeter, we are definitely within spec. And as far as the height goes, I went ahead and set up the socket on the very edge of the panel. I put some tape on it so you guys can see a little bit better. I marked the beam with the black dot. The beam is a little faint, but you guys can see it. And if I set it up on this end, we get same exact measurement. Since I've ensured that this piece is sitting exactly where it's supposed to be, now I can move on to adding the next panel.
And yet again, let's go ahead and compare our measurements from the undamaged side to the damaged side.
Now on the good side, I'm taking measurements from that hole over there. And to the front, we are at 790 to 791 millimeters to the center of a hole. On a damaged side, measuring from the same exact hole over there. And if I come to the front, we are a little short. About 5 millimeters too short. But that's because this panel is loose and I can move this thing back and forth, no problem.
So I'm going to unclamp this panel and pull it forward just enough to where our measurement checks out, and then we'll get it reclamped. Get it checked out one more time and our measurement is right where it needs to be. And now let's go ahead and compare the height of the new replacement panel to the existing panel on the undamaged side. With the socket sitting right over the bolt hole, I got the height of the laser beam matching up to the black dot. Now let's see what the other side looks like.
The beam is passing a little lower.
No problem. I'll unclamp this panel and move it down just a few millimeters. Now we're looking perfect here. Got the panel all reclamped. And now let's go ahead and take the last side-to-side measurement. Measuring the undamaged side out to the center line.
We are at 584 millimeters.
Flip the tape around and measure from the damaged side once again out to the center line, and the measurement that I'm getting here is slightly different. I am getting 580 millimeters on this side. That means I'm coming up 4 millimeters short.
So what does that mean? That's right. That means that our damaged side needs to slide out just a few millimeters.
Unclamp the panel, readjust it, reclamp it, and recheck the measurement. And now our reading comes out to 584 millimeters, same as the undamaged side. And only now I can refer to our schematic to see, are we actually going to get that 1172 between the both radiator support bolt holes.
And since I am measuring from the edge of the hole on that side, I gotta go to the edge of the hole on this side too. And we are right at 72, so 1172. We are right on the money once again. Guys, everything checked out just as I hoped it would, and now we're basically ready to weld everything in, but I wouldn't weld just yet because once we get it welded in, it is finalized. There is no going back without destroying all of it again. So the very last step before any kind of welding takes place is I'm going to use some sheet metal screws to temporarily attach all of this new structure to our car, and then I'm going to put our fenders, the hood, probably the headlights, and maybe a bumper in. I want to ensure that everything is lining up before I get it all finalized. You don't need a ton of these screws. I just got 1, 2, 3, and a fourth one down here. And all of this is surprisingly holding pretty good.
I still got a couple of clamps down here, but they are out of the way. I mainly wanted to get these outer clamps removed because this is where the fender goes and they would for sure be getting in the way.
I know someone out there is going to say, hey, you also have to check your diagonals to make sure that they're the same. So, okay, you know what? Let's do it. I'm dropping the tram gauge in that far front hole on the core support. And back here, I am hitting the very center of the strut tower bolt.
Now let's go ahead and switch over to the other side, and we get the same exact measurement. At this point, I've run out of things to measure, so well, I guess we're done. I already have a radiator and AC condenser installed inside of the replacement radiator support. Bumper reinforcement bar goes in next, so that the radiator support could get firmly attached right up to it. Let's go ahead and quickly make sure that the radiator support is sitting dead center in the middle of the car. First, I want to make sure that it's 100% parallel to the firewall and isn't skewed on either side. Measurement we get here is 993 millimeters at the center of a bolt hole, and if we compare it to the other side, we get the same exact measurement. And the last thing to check here would be to run our diagonals, where the center of a bolt hole falls right onto that 9. Now let's compare it to the other side, and the measurement that we get is the same, so we're looking good.
The reason I'm really measuring everything out as I'm putting stuff together right now is obviously so I could check to make sure that all of my gaps are lining up good. But at the same time, I think this is going to be my final assembly on a lot of the panels, because really, once I put everything together, make sure all my gaps are looking good. The only thing that I'll be taking off afterwards is probably the bumper, the headlight, and this fender. Because once these items are out of the way, then I'll be able to do all of my welding, a little bit of painting, and those are the only items I'm gonna have to reinstall back on the vehicle. So things like the radiator support, the fender on the other side.
I take that back because I totally forgot about the damage on top of that driver's side fender.
And the hood, those are there to stay for good at this point.
Therefore, I went ahead and buttoned up everything on the radiator support just to get it out of the way. Then I got the hood mounted on some new hinges. Wait, what? The hood is already painted? Yep, I went ahead and pre-painted the hood and the passenger side fender about a week or so ago. So the driver's side fender and the passenger side front door are two elements that still need to be fixed before I can get them painted. And I figured I would start with the door first. With the help of a rubber mallet, I was able to bring down this raised edge of the door where it would once again be flush with the fender. After which I mounted the fender to check on my progress.
All right, that worked out pretty well. So now I am flush for most part. Obviously that edge will need more work, and I still gotta work this crease that I got going on in here. But all in all, at least now I can open the door without nicking the fender.
Then the other fender went on, followed by the headlights.
All right, guys, so check this out. I got both fenders, the hood, and headlights in place. Obviously, you know, the radiator support and all of that has been installed. So never mind, the hood is looking all filthy because the pollen's coming down and there's just a bunch of dust and dirt on it. Let's take a look at our driver's side gap. It looks great all the way up. So moving on to the other side. Look at that. We got a nice even gap all the way up. So the only thing is the fender is still loose right here. The only thing I gotta say is, if you look, my gap is looking good, but it kind of opens up right in this area. And that is due to this hood not being made to the higher quality, I guess. Because if we look at the other side, on this side, we got the same exact thing. The gap is just a little bit bigger, and this is the OEM factory fender. So I know it's not the issue with the fender, but with actual hood itself. Also, the headlights are lining up nicely on both sides. One more thing I want to note, and that's the use of laser as I'm putting this whole front end together, just to make sure that things are lining up on both sides. Let me show you what I mean. I got the laser going once again, and just to make sure, every now and again I do make sure that the car is still leveled out by hitting both of the corners of the A-pillars, and you know what, everything is checking out. Car stayed in the leveled out position. So if you look at the very tip, you see the laser is hitting the very tip of the fender. Now, if I go to the opposite side, a little hard to see, but There's a green dot right there. I know that this fender is sitting right where it's supposed to be since this side did not get damaged. And since this fender is checking out the way it is, I'm not just guessing, but I am making sure that all of my work in this area is right on. There's one more quick thing I want to note, and it's right here. Earlier, while I was setting the fender to the hood, I thought that this fender was sitting a little too high, but I wasn't sure. Is it really the fender sitting too high, or is it the hood sitting too low? I set the socket with a little dot on it at the very far edge of the hood. So if I move the socket to the opposite side, it's a little hard to see, but that beam is maybe 0.5 millimeter lower than the dot. But really, it's such a negligible difference that this is actually still within spec.
My original plan for this video was to include the repair process for this door, as well as getting all of our replacement parts welded in, but I feel like this video is starting to get a little long, and I may not have enough material to get my next and final video on this project to full length. So in the next video, I'm definitely going to finalize this door, get all of the welding out of the way and all of the paintwork done, so that this whole project could get wrapped up.